Hey guys, I wanted to go through your Notes 12 distributing negatives and simplifying today. So, oops, sorry, got to change my colors. Change, erase. Okay, I'm going to try another pen. So Notes number 12. Distributing negatives and simplifying. So if you remember when we did distribution in the prior chapter, we were distributing whole numbers generally, and then we would look, sometimes we were able to collect like terms. So that's probably what we're going to be doing here as well. Now we're looking at two different lessons, lesson 2-7 and lesson 2-8. Okay, so remember the distributive property. And some of you missed that question on the test. It said be very specific about his name, and his full name is the distributive property of multiplication over addition. And the reason why it's important to understand that is because it's one of the few operations, or the few properties that actually has two different two different operations involved. There's multiplication and addition, multiplication or subtraction, okay? So, that's right here. It says, basically, if you have a number and you want to multiply it by a quantity, the answer you get of the product of AB plus the product of AC is going to give you the same thing as if you were able to add the B and C. And again, the whole reason why they came up with a distributive property is if inside the parentheses there's a variable, there's no way to combine the variable and, let's say, a constant. So this is the only thing that we can do in algebra if variables are inside parentheses. So again, the kind of a non-mathematical way of describing the distributive property is multiplying to get rid of parentheses. Okay, so but now what we're going to deal with is, what if that A is a negative number? How's that going to change things? So if the term outside the parentheses is negative, so if we have a negative value, even if it's just a negative sign, so there's no number, which if you don't see the number, then you assume it to be 1, so it would be -1. So even if it's just that, you, and then I'm going to yell at you a little bit, must distribute the negative to each term inside the parentheses. So in addition to multiplying by whatever the number is, you're also going to have to multiply by a sign. Remembering your sign rules, in multiplication, if the signs are the same, you get a positive. If the signs are different, you're going to get a negative. Okay? Now, the product that you get after distributing the negative so this is more in the case of if there's just a negative in front of the parentheses, that is called the additive inverse. And if you remember before when we talked about additive inverses, there are two values that when I add them, I always get 0. Okay, so really important. So basically what this is saying, if I have a negative value outside the parentheses, I'm going to multiply that negative a times the b plus, and that comes from what's inside the parentheses, the negative a times the c, which results in a negative ab, so I get opposite signs, minus AC. I never write a double sign. I never write plus minus or minus minus. I just write the sign once. Okay? So just be forewarned that all the signs will change. Okay? So let's do some practice problems with this. Directions are going to say simplify. And we're going to distribute. What that means is to distribute the negative to each term in the parentheses then combine any like terms. There may not be any, but if there are, you got to combine them. Okay? So we hear this direction, simplify, and a general way of understanding that direction is do all the math that you can do until there's no more math to be done. Okay? So let's start with number 1. We have 5x minus the quantity 3x plus 9. Okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to distribute the negative to each term in the parentheses, because that's all that's there. Now, in terms of what I expect to see, you start with the original problem, and then you show me the result of distributing the negative. So a negative times a positive is a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. Next, you look for any like terms, and we should see them. We have 5x minus and negative 3x. So what do we get when we have 5x and we take away 3x? Well, we end up getting 2x, and then the minus 9 comes along for the ride. And again, notice how my answer goes, and this is protocol for algebra, that you put your variables in the front and your constant, that's the number that doesn't have a variable attached to it, in the back. If there's more than one variable, and we'll see that coming up in the next example, then the expectation is that you write the variables in alpha or alphabetical order. Okay, so let's show that in this next problem. So this one we have 5x minus 2y minus the quantity 2y minus 3x minus 4. Okay? Now, there's nothing I can do with the 5x or the minus 2y because there's nothing to distribute there. It's not until I get to here that I'm going to distribute negatives. So a negative times a positive is a negative 2y. And a negative times a negative will give me a positive 3x. And then a negative times a negative will give me a positive 4. And now what we're going to do is look for some like terms. And I actually see two sets of like terms. I see some x's, and there's a 5x, and in front of the 3 is a positive, so it's 5x plus 3x. That's going to give me a total of 8x. I also see a negative 2y and a negative 2y. So again, I'm using my rules for adding and subtracting. And I notice the signs are the same. They're both negative, so I'm going to add them, and that means I'm going to get a bigger negative number. So negative 2 and negative 2 is negative 4y. And then lastly, there's the constant all by itself, and it gets written at the end. And there's your answer. And Again, we never leave double signs, so I never would see plus minus, or I would never see minus minus, or plus plus, none of that ever. All right, let's do another one. And now we're going to make it a little bit trickier, that we have 5a minus 3 times the quantity 7a minus 6. So here's the deal. When we're distributing on this one, we're not just distributing a 3, we're distributing a negative 3. So I'm going to actually kind of do this one out step by step so you can see it. So we get 5a, and then I'm just going to use plus, and then use the negative 3 times the 7a, and then we're going to write plus, and we're going to multiply that negative 3 times the negative 6. So that gives me 5a, a positive times a negative is a negative, 21a, and then a negative times a negative is a positive 18. Sure enough, though, I do have some like terms. And remember what we're really going to do here in a subtraction problem. We're going to rename it as an addition problem by adding the opposite. So my signs are different. So I'm going to end up subtracting, and the bigger number is negative, so I'm going to put that in. And then 21 take away 5 is 16. So I get negative 16a plus 18, and there's my answer. Okay. Let's do another one. This time, I'm not going to give you any variables. So we got 3 times the quantity, 4 plus 2, minus, and then braces, 7 minus brackets, 4 minus parentheses, 6 plus 5. So what we're going to do, I'm going to do a little numbering here, is we have to take care of anything in a grouping symbol first. And if you notice, we have 4 grouping symbols. There's parentheses, braces, brackets, parentheses. So we start with the innermost grouping symbol, which would be the parentheses. So that's our first step. We're not going to distribute because I can actually go faster if I just follow order of operations. So I have 3 and 4 plus 2 is 6, minus braces 7 minus brackets 4 minus, and 6 plus 5, I can add them together and I get 11. Should be, sorry, braces over there. Alright, next. Now this 3 times 6 is kind of opposite. There's no effect its answer will have on the next step I should do in the other grouping, so I'm actually going to do the steps simultaneously. So I can go ahead and take care of him now, and I can take care of that next grouping symbol. So I get 3 times 6 is 18, and then minus, and then I have braces 7 minus, and then I have 4 take away 11. And remember what that really is 4 plus negative 11. There's my 2 strokes. Signs are different. Bigger number is negative, so I'll get a negative answer, and 11 take away 4 is 7. Oops, here we go back. Just to highlight that guy. Okay, so I still have a grouping symbol, and I can't do anything about this 18 yet, so he just comes along for the ride. And now what I'm going to do is rewrite this as an addition problem by adding the opposite. And what I end up with is 7 plus 7, which is 14. So I'll just make it in blue. And now I'm left with one simple problem, finally. 18 take away 14 is 4. And there's the answer. So again, start with the innermost grouping symbol. Next, make sure that you're changing your addition or subtraction problems to adding by adding the opposite, so keep that in mind. Okay? Alright, I've got one more. Now this one, I'm not going to be so lucky. I have brackets, 5 times parentheses, x plus 2, close the parentheses, minus 3x, close the brackets, minus and then I've got brackets 3 times the quantity y plus 2 minus 7 times parentheses 7 minus 3, close parentheses, close the brackets. So here's the deal. I want to get down to as few numbers as possible inside the brackets before I try to distribute to get rid of the brackets. So on the first group, I'm going to be distributing 5 times x and 5 times 2. That's my first step. 5 times x is 5x, 5 times 2 is 10, and then I write out the rest of what's in that bracket. Now over here, I got a lot of stuff to do. I've got 3 times y and 3 times 2, so I'm going to do that first. And I get 3y, and 3 times 2 is 6. Now, here comes the tricky one. I'm not multiplying by 7, I'm multiplying by negative 7. So it's negative 7 times y, which is negative 7y. And then it's going to be negative 7 times a negative 3. 2 negatives make a positive, and 7 times 3 is 21. Okay, now, I'm not going to get rid of the brackets yet, because there's still some math I can do inside the brackets. I'm going to simplify inside the brackets first. Like terms, oops. So I have 5x, take away 3x is 2x, and then there's the plus 10, minus, and the brackets over here. Again, I've got like terms, 3y and negative 7y, so the signs are different. Bigger number is negative, so the answer is going to be negative, and I'm going to subtract, and 7 take away 3 is 4, and there comes the y. And then I also have constants. So I have a 6 plus a 21. So I'm going to add them together, and I get 27. Alright, now I'm ready to drop the brackets. Now, look what's in front of the first set of brackets. Nothing. So that means it's positive in front of it, which means the 2x and the 10 are going to stay the same. Where we're going to change is here. We're going to multiply a negative 1 times a negative 4y, which gives me a positive 4y. And then we're going to multiply a negative 1 times a positive 27 to get a negative 27. And then I look for like terms. And what I notice is I have 2 different variables, so I can't combine them. I'm going to write them in alpha order. X is in front, followed by the y's. Where I did end up having like terms was with my constants. So again, I have 10 minus 27, so it's really the same thing as saying 10 plus negative 27. Bigger number is negative, so my answer will be negative. I'm going to subtract them, and 27 take away 10 is 17. And that's your answer. All right, good luck on your homework.